The final stage is a loss of patriotism because he doesn't understand why he should defend a state that doesn't protect him. The person decides to defend only himself. He makes the following conclusion: I witnessed a crime on national television. Authorities are idle and support this crime, which means they intentionally break the laws and are behind those violations. Authorities want to deprive me of my legal rights and freedoms, hence they are a threat to me. People always strive to eliminate the source of their constant stress and fear. As a result, when authorities become an enemy to the people, people express their distrust and protest through demonstrations and strikes, which lead to revolutions. However, even after a change in the government, the situation does not resolve, and an individual continues to experience severe stress. Because, regardless of the party affiliation of the new government, the enemy of the democratic world remains in the shadows, continuing its informational terrorist attacks, and the whole cycle begins anew. Informational terrorism will always target current authorities in order to destabilize society and weaken the constitutional order in a chosen democratic country through the actions of its own people. In addition, the enemy of democracy simultaneously carries out numerous informational terrorist attacks aimed at dividing citizens among themselves. The enemy incites hostility and hatred in society by first dividing, then pitting various groups against each other, and broadcasting this conflict through the media, manipulating human consciousness in this way. The enemy forces you to believe that you, the citizens in this country, are enemies to each other through acts of xenophobia, extremism, and terrorism. The enemy artificially generates hatred towards a chosen group of people, nationality, race, or community, embedding a lasting negative perception of them in your subconscious. Globally, the enemy's actions lead to a situation where, due to continuous internal destabilization, social order gives way to chaos, and democratic laws cease to function. Ultimately, this most often results in civil war, which completely destroys what was once a free country. This is precisely what the enemy of democracy aims for, as it thus gains more power and brings closer global totalitarianism. The most alarming thing is that the enemy accomplishes it, all through your actions, merely by instilling the necessary beliefs. For this very reason, informational and psychological terrorist attacks are more terrifying than physical ones, for they directly influence your subconsciousness, bypassing critical thinking. Thus, when destroying your own country, you will believe that you act for the benefit, consciously, and according to your inner convictions. In order to create provocative informational acts of terrorism and flood global media with them, the enemy of democracy uses its numerous branches, tentacles that penetrate various sectors of society and disguise themselves as mainstream information agendas. Today, using one of the enemy's many branches as an example, I will show you how it operates and explain why it is vital for each of you to be aware of this. One of those branches is a network of international criminal terrorist organizations. These organizations, which I will discuss later on, became the subject of an investigation that revealed the main patterns, methods, and tools used by the hidden enemy in its war against humanity. The results of this investigation, which lasted a whole 10 years, have been made public by Dr. Egon Cholakian, an American intelligence educator and national security expert. As part of the international investigation, on June 22, 2023, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution on the 8th review of the UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy. In this resolution, the General Assembly provided the most comprehensive definition of terrorism and identified activities that essentially constitute terrorism.
Terrorism includes any activity aimed at achieving the following goals: denial of human rights, fundamental freedoms, and democracy; incitement to commit terrorist acts and acts of violence that spread hatred and threaten human lives. Creating threats to the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and security of states. Impeding the enjoyment of political, civil, economic, social, and cultural rights, including the right to life, liberty, and security. Destabilizing governments. This resolution calls for combating any manifestation of terrorism.
Thanks to such a comprehensive definition of terrorism, the enemy can no longer hide its incessant terrorist attacks. So, why have I focused specifically on this branch of the enemy, the network of international criminal terrorist organizations? Because this branch is well studied, and its organizations use the same key methods and tools as those applied by other branches, which the enemy has created for establishing global totalitarianism. Once you understand the enemy's actions in one field, you will be able to recognize them in all other fields as well. This means that all the schemes that the enemy can only implement in secrecy will stop working as they become obvious. This network of international criminal terrorist organizations uses methods of informational terrorism, cloaking itself with government authorities and democratic laws. Those organizations do not fear publicity, since their activities are usually not evaluated by society critically. Very few people even know that those organizations exist, observing only the tragic outcome of their activities. They remain out of the public eye, yet, being a part of the enemy's unified scheme, they represent a crucial link in achieving the enemy's global goal, the destruction of democracy in America and the entire democratic world. This network of international criminal terrorist organizations is a vital component in the enemy's scheme because those organizations operate openly. They are like a litmus test for democracy. Where they operate, democracy no longer exists, and where they appear, democracy will soon vanish. I am speaking about anti-cult organizations that represent a well-organized transnational terrorist network.
Chapter 2. Transnational Terrorist Network of Anti-Cult Organizations.
You'll be surprised to know how many tragic events worldwide are behind the anti-cult movement. Using special manipulative methods, they are currently preparing American society for a full-scale civil war. And now you will find out how it's being done.
Hidden mechanisms of inciting hatred.
Dear Americans, you see and feel the presence of an unprecedented huge division in present-day American society. I'm sure you understand perfectly well where it all leads to, and you already suspect that there are hidden mechanisms used against you to incite hatred in American society. What are those mechanisms? Who uses them and why? Who teaches Americans to hate and demonize each other, seeking to ignite a second civil war in our country, and how actively is this being done? You will now receive answers to these questions. Dear Americans, you will find out exactly how you are being led today from the point where you are peacefully sitting on a couch and watching a movie together with your friends, to the point where you would be ready to take up arms against those same friends just because they have a different opinion. Perhaps this idea seems unimaginable to you now, but you will see how manipulative methods are already artificially guiding you towards that. One of the main methods that the enemy of democracy uses nowadays both against you and against the whole world, provoking hatred in societies in various countries and unleashing regional conflicts and global wars, is the method of dehumanization. By deliberately dehumanizing one group of people in the eyes of another, people are turned into haters of their colleagues and neighbors, and even into their potential killers, which is far worse. In order to attain dehumanization and division in society, the enemy uses the tactics of stigmatization and labeling, and one of the labels the enemy uses in its global bloody game with human lives is the word cult. you'll be shocked to discover how much suffering the deliberate use of the degrading label cult or sect has caused to people, and how many tragedies it has brought and keeps bringing to the American people and the world as a whole. At first glance, it seems that these are just words. However, with the help of these very labeling words, America is now being driven closer to civil war, while the entire global community is being led to World War III. Who uses these labels, and why, and how are they used as weapons of mass destruction?
Today, a well-coordinated transnational terrorist network operates in the international arena, the purpose of which is to incite hatred both within countries and in the global community, by labeling certain groups of people as a cult or a sect, through mass media and information space. The criminal network engaged in this form of information terrorism is the anti-cult movement. The anti-cult movement includes a number of organizations and individual activists who trigger public persecution of groups which they label as cults or sects. Based on their subjective biases and arbitrary criteria, anti-cultists can classify any existing association of people as a cult or a sect, thus subjecting it to dehumanization and public hatred. The core of their activity lies in organized influence on the media space for the purpose of generating a negative perception of a particular targeted group of people. Using the word cult or sect as their main weapon, adherents of the anti-cult movement carry out regular information terrorist attacks. They generate news stories that cause moral panic, societal division, and dehumanization of law-abiding citizens. Through their activities, representatives of the anti-cult movement incite mass hatred and violence and increase social hostility and tension in society, which actually makes their activities a brutal manifestation of information terrorism.
Most often, new religious movements and ideological group entities initially became victims of anti-cult terrorism. Commercial, secular, and political organizations with a pronounced ideological basis were also regularly included in the black list, maintained by anti-cultists. However, today, entire nations and countries, including the United States, are already becoming targets of their atrocities. Using the term cult or sect, they create conditions for directing public hatred at their chosen target. The purposeful use of the terms cult and sect is part of a long-term strategy of the anti-cult movement, which resulted in the emergence of a number of destructive phenomena in American society, including school shootings. A little bit later, I'll reveal to you the chain of events where the use of the labels cult and sect led to a situation when children are now shooting other children.
Why is cult a key word in the activities of anti-cultists, and why is it so dangerous? The term cult, which is more common in the US, and the term sect used in Europe and post-Soviet countries, didn't initially have a negative meaning, but rather a neutral and culturological one. However, through the efforts of anti-cultists, the situation has changed. In the course of their hectic activities, representatives of the anti-cult movement gradually endowed the concepts of cult and sect with an increasingly negative connotation. Due to their activity, today the terms cult and sect are associated in mass consciousness with such notions as brainwashing, psychological violence, sexual violence, criminal activity, and mass suicide. It is precisely with the words cult and sect that massive information terrorism begins nowadays, carried out by anti-cult organizations and their representatives.